Good morning, section 12. Good morning, section 12. How are you guys? Sorry, almost called you guys section 11. I know that you would not have liked that. Yeah, lots of animosity I can sense between the two sections. And I'm like a torn parent between section 11 and section 12. I love you both in different ways. But section 14, forget those guys. Okay, so I'm back from the beach and ready to keep rolling with some property law and some possessory estates. Before we push into the Baker case, I just want to sort of check in. How are you guys doing with life estates? Feel like, some thumbs ups or some thumbs downs? You feel like you're getting the basics of how life estates function? We doing okay? Get some nods. Looks like somebody has changed my name on my computer. I got a kind of okay. So the reason I'm checking in on life estates is because what we're doing is identifying, creating the building blocks that we're going to be using as we get into more complicated conveyances. I don't see anybody still in the waiting room, so I don't know. Maybe they're in a different waiting room. So we're creating the building blocks that we're going to use to do more complicated conveyances later. And so understanding the basics of the life estate is going to be important, because what we're going to eventually do is create all sorts of complicated remainders, which we kind of are beginning to do in the Baker case itself. In addition, as we continue through the material for today, we're going to see that there are possessory estates that are distinct from life estates and fee simples and are more difficult, right? They're a lot less straightforward. A life estate is connected to only one possible condition: the person who the life estate is attached to being alive. So with defeasible fees, we have something that is somewhat distinct and different and potentially more complicated. Nicole, I see your hand up. There are people in the waiting room. I'm sorry. Yeah.
There's about 4 or 5 who are stuck.
Okay. Is that what you're gonna? Is that your hand?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, welcome waiting room folks. My bad on leaving you in there for a while. What I was asking, so if you're a waiting room person who've just gotten in, was how we're doing with life estates and possessory estates. Feeling okay? Let's do it. I think I mentioned during class on last week, we are going to have lots of examples, and I know I keep promising that, but I don't want to start giving y'all examples beyond what we have encountered, in the sort of slides that I'm using, until you have down enough different things to where I can give you some sample questions that have lots of different things in them. So maybe Wednesday, I think we'll be ready for that. And we will push forward from there. So let's talk about Baker versus Whedon. So we have another situation in which there is a will and we are stuck interpreting it, although this case is really not exactly about interpretation of a will in the way that White versus Brown was about interpretation of a will. If you recall from White versus Brown, we spent a lot of time talking about these rules of construction where we have ambiguity in the will as to what should happen under certain circumstances. And we talked about these presumptions and these other types of things, like we don't like restraints on alienation. And those helped us get to an answer that was probably not entirely satisfying to everybody, that's what Jessie Lyde wanted to do with her property that she didn't want to be sold, but helped us at least get to an answer as to whether or not this was a life estate or a fee simple that was given to um, Evelyn. In Baker, we have less ambiguity in the will itself, but we still have some issues that pop up as a result of what has been created. So let's first just get a sense of the case and make sure that we're all on the same page with that. So I'm looking around. I see Lauren. Do I see Lauren? Yes, I see Lauren. So Lauren, tell me a little bit about what's going on in the Baker case that gets us to these problems.
John Whedon was a 55-year-old man, and he married for his third time to I don't know if that's how it's spelled. And he bought almost 153 acres of land, and he and his third wife farmed that land together. From his first marriage, he had 2 daughters, but he didn't have a good relationship with them. So when he went to execute his last will, he excluded the daughters from the will, and left everything to his wife. And then for the remainder, the land was supposed to go to either her children or the grandchildren of his 2 daughters.
Okay.
And their names were Florence and Delette. I guess that's how that's spelled, or how that's spelled. And then, so when he died,
let
Anna
me pause you.
widow stayed on the land for a few years, and then eventually she moved.
Are other folks hearing audio difficulty with Lauren? Okay. I'm hearing you, but it's a little bouncy in and out. But we're gonna try to work through this. I want to pause you for a second, and I'm going to put a portion of the will up. Okay. A portion of the will up, and I'm going to ask you a question. So I've put just the very beginning of this will. I give and bequeath to my beloved wife, Anna Plaxico Whedon, all of my property, both real, personal, and mixed, during her natural life, and upon her death to her children. Okay, so that's all it's got right now. And we're gonna pick up on the other portions that you mentioned, in which the granddaughters, the grandchildren are included. So if I just gave you this portion of it, I give and bequeath to Anna all of my property, both real, personal, and mixed, during her natural life and upon her death to her children. And I asked the question, what interests are created here? What would you identify? What interests would you identify from this?
He gave her a life estate.
Okay.
So she has interest as soon as he passed away.
Right. So she has the life estate. What other interests are created just from this portion of the will?
If she had children, her children would have the remainder or future interest in the land.
Great. So this would be a situation in which it looks like Anna's children, now we know that they don't exist yet, and so it's a little more complicated than just saying Anna's children have a remainder, because non-existent people can't have interests. But for a placeholder, it seems like what's been created is Anna has a life estate and Anna's children have a remainder. Good. But we know that actually it says other things after what I've picked up here, right? So it says, upon her death to her children, if she has any, in the event she dies without issue, then at the death of Anna, I give, bequeath, blah, 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 to my grandchildren, each grandchild sharing equally with the other. So now what is given? So the interest to Anna is the same. Okay, so that's the easy part. Anna has a life estate. Anna's children, again, they don't exist yet, so it's hard to say what they have, but for our purposes, we can say they still have a remainder, or something that looks like a remainder. What other interests are created by this, by this will now?
I guess the grandchildren would also have or they would have a future interest if Anna did not have children.
Good. So I love how careful you were with that answer, right? So they have a future interest. You identified functionally when that future interest would actually become something meaningful, right? If Anna died without children. And yet you were a little reluctant to name what that future interest was. Did I sense that reluctance correctly?
Yes.
Yes, right? Because it looks like something that we haven't exactly touched on, but it isn't, right? It actually is also a remainder, okay? And so what the grandchildren have here is a remainder, and the children have a remainder. Is it possible that that Anna's children, right? So not Whedon's kids, right? They're clearly intentionally cut out of this will. So the individuals that we have are Anna with her life estate. She's easy. The grandchildren with a remainder if Anna doesn't have kids, and Anna's kids with a remainder if she does have them, if she does have kids. So is it possible that both kids that Anna have and Whedon's grandkids will take this property, or is that like a either or kind of thing?
I would think it would be either or. It was almost kind of like the grandchildren's interest was conditional on whether Anna had children.
And if Anna had a child,
so I would believe.
Yeah, I think that's right.
The remainder would go to that child.
The remainder would go to that child. So if Anna has a child at any point before she dies, then that child would take the remainder, and what would happen to the grandchildren's interests?
I don't think they would have interest anymore.
That's exactly right. Their interest would be poof, gone. Okay. And so what they have is known as a contingent remainder. Okay. And in fact, the unborn children of Anna also on some level have a contingent remainder, in the sense that it's contingent upon their birth, right? But we really wouldn't identify that because it can't exist until they're born. And so what we would say is that the grandchildren here have a contingent remainder. So this is just a different flavor of remainder. So Lauren was careful and said it's a future interest. It only comes into being if something happens. And then she identified that the if is if Anna dies without having kids. Okay. And so what we have there is known as a contingent remainder. Note that that's different from when we have our regular old, hold on, let me pull it back up, our regular old life estate remainder situation. Let me see if I can find it. 2A, well, that one is it, but it's 2A for life then to be, okay? So this is not a 2A for life then to be. This is a little more complicated than that. That would be, instead of a contingent remainder, what we are going to eventually call a vested remainder, okay? A remainder in which we have no doubt that B is going to be the entity that takes this at the end of A's life, compared down here to Baker's situation, where we have Anna with a life estate, Anna's kids, if they're born, would have a remainder, and the grandkids have a contingent remainder. And in function, and let me just ask you this, if there is no kids of Anna's that are born, Lauren, and then when Anna dies, what do the grandkids take? What?
Do they each take, I know they get the remainder, but do they each take a fee simple
Yeah, that's
in
exactly
the
right.
land?
They would take a portion of the fee simple. And note that the way that this is phrased, this is just like a little bonus side note that we get from this case. You know how we talked about sort of in the beginning about per stirpes, how it would follow depending on, you know, the line of succession with parents and kids. Whedon in this instance is saying, no. It's not per stirpes. It's each grandchild shares equally with the other. So let's say, and I see that Charles has linked to the family tree that he has created, which might be helpful, to take a look at. If one child has, so let's say he's got, Charles, help me out here. How many grandkids does Whedon have?
A whole lot, Professor. Let's see here. So it starts out at 5, and then it ends with 3.
Okay. And the grandkids that he has, they don't come equally from each of his children, right?
Right.
Right. So the way that this is worded, those grandkids take not per stirpes through like, and he has 3 children, right?
Right.
The Citrix page.
What's going on here? Is that your background, Charles?
Yeah, I'm fixing it. Sorry.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that's what it was. So instead of going through the 3 children equally and then sharing, so like a third, and then splitting the thirds, this is phrased so that what happens for those 5 grandkids?
Well, he says they get equally, so I don't. What?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. So that we don't have to say how many sisters and brothers did you have, and then which child, you know, which parent did you come from, which sibling did you come from. Here it says very clearly that it's going to be in equal shares to each of the grandkids. So this is the opposite of per stirpes. So I just want to make that point real quick, that if you don't want it to be a per stirpes distribution to a generation, you know, of heirs, then that can be done. It can be done by this exact language, sharing equally with the other, right? So that's what has been accomplished here. Brandon, I see your hand up. What's going on?
Yeah, I had a question. So the grandchildren have fee simple. Would it be a fee simple as well for Anna's children if they were born?
If they were born, so they would have a fee simple. Just make clear, Brandon, at what point would the grandkids have fee simple?
If it went, okay, if Anna doesn't have children, and then she dies, the fee simple goes to the grandchildren. So
Exactly.
My question is, if Anna had children, Anna has the life estate, the remainder passes to her children, would that be a fee simple, or would that still be a life estate?
That would be a fee simple.
Okay.
So that would be precisely. And the reason I asked you to restate it, I just wanted to make sure we're clear that they take the fee simple only upon Anna's death, right? And so what's going to happen here is it's either going to go to Anna's children, if she has any, in fee simple, or to the grandkids of Whedon in fee simple. Okay, so everybody good with that? That's not really what the case ends up being about, but it is important because we have to understand what's going on with the case what's going on with the conveyance in order to understand the conflict in the case. Are we good with this? With what's been created? A life estate and a contingent remainder. Looks like we're good. Okay, so Lauren, coming back to you. We have got a life estate and a contingent remainder, and the grandkids are involved. And so tell me a little bit more about the story here about, I interrupted your telling of the story. So tell me a little bit more about how we ended up in this lawsuit. Like who's wanting to do what with this property that's leading to this lawsuit?
Anna wants to sell it because when was it? In 1964, I believe her and the grandchildren were contacted about them wanting to build like a bypass through the land. And I believe that the grandchildren, they sold some of it and they split the payment equally between the grandchildren and Anna.
Okay.
And then later, I think, so the value of the property at the time that she wanted it sold, Anna wanted it sold, was $168,500. And in about 4 years, the value of the land would have appreciated to $336,000. So the grandchildren, I believe it was Henry Baker, he tried to sell the land for a fair price to help Anna out, basically, because she was under economic distress, is what she was saying. And so I guess they said that the building of the bypass slowed his ability. He wasn't able to sell it for a fair price because the construction of the bypass was going too slow, I guess. So then Anna, she brought suit due to her economic distress. And
Great.
So she wants the property sold.
She wants to sell the property. And so let me ask you this. Can she sell the property? Let's make it an easy question. What can she sell?
I'm not sure. I know she has a possessory interest, and I think she could sell at least some of it, is what the court ends up saying.
Okay. Well,
She can sell
forget the land itself. What does she have for sure? There's no doubt about what she has in terms of interests.
She has a life estate.
Okay. And so what could she sell?
I don't know.
Charles, you want to help
She
her?
could-
Or go ahead, Lauren. Go ahead.
I don't know.
Okay. Charles, you want to help her? So Anna has a life estate. What could she sell?
She could sell the life estate.
She can sell a life estate. And so what does that mean? What does it mean to sell a life estate?
She sells her interest in the property.
And so if, let's say she sold you her life estate, what would you be getting?
I would have the right to be on that property either as long as she lives or as long as I live.
Which do you think it is?
Let's go with if she sells it to me, then it's as long as she lives. Yeah.
Okay. And why would that's correct. So why would
Back
that
to
be?
the old rule, you can only transfer the sticks that you have.
Right. And what is the nature of the stick that she has? Whose life is it connected to?
It's connected to her life.
Right. So she can only sell a life estate that's connected to her life because that's the stick that was given to her. So she sells to Charles a life estate that's connected to Anna's life, and Charles is correct. He gets the ability to come onto that property until Anna's life ends, right? And he can sort of do on some level whatever he wants with the property until Anna's life ends. Although we're going to see not exactly anything he wants to. So Charles, what can she definitely not sell?
She cannot sell the fee simple.
She can't sell a fee simple, and in particular, carved out of the fee simple, that what she's missing in terms of the interest that she has is what?
The ability to resell, not alienation, but that other word.
Lauren, your turn to help. What does she not have?
Future interest.
She doesn't have the future interest, right? So she can't sell the future interest because she doesn't have the future interest. And at this point, because it seems like Anna doesn't have kids and isn't going to have kids, the future interest is still a contingent remainder for the grandkids. There's still, in theory, a possibility that Anna could have kids in this instance, but the grandkids are involved in this because they are the future interest holders. So if you wanted to sell a fee simple of this property, you have to be able to sell both the possessory interest, which Anna has, and the future interests, which the grandkids have. That's why, as Lauren was telling it, we had to get the grandkids notified back when they wanted to sell a portion of the property for this highway to come through. Okay. And so they got notified and they got paid for the giving up their future interest to that portion. What she wants to do is sell the whole property, but she can't do it without the future interests. So what she's done, so there's two ways in which this could happen. One, she and the future interest holders could agree, right? They could agree, you know what we should do? We should sell the property fee simple and split the money however we're gonna split the money. But they also could do what is happening here, which is that Anna is going to court and asking a court to sell the property because she and the future interest holders can't agree on, to do that themselves. Is that making sense? So the nature of this suit is that Anna is asking the court to essentially force the future interest holders here to sell their sticks, included with hers, so that the property can be sold as a fee simple. Because Charles, let me ask you, which is going to fetch more money for Anna, selling a life estate or getting a portion of a sale of a fee simple? Charles, you there? That's going to fetch more or less?
Charles, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think he knows. He might have some distraction in the background. That's my guess here. Not letting him unmute. Let's see if I can unmute him. I cannot.
The life estate is more. It wasn't letting me unmute. Life estate
Okay.
is more valuable.
You think the life estate would be more valuable? Why?
Because it's permanent, and where's the other one is temporary.
So I think you've got it flip-flopped, which I think you're right that the permanent one is going to be more valuable.
Yeah, you know what I meant. Yeah.
Yes, the permanent one is more valuable. The fee simple is going to be more valuable than the life estate. Even though she's not going to get 100% of the payout on the fee simple, she's only going to get a portion. They're going to have to decide what is the value of her share versus the grandkids' share. They're going to have to make that determination. But in general, it's going to fetch a larger sum, and she's going to take a portion of it because no one is going to pay anything close to market value for a life estate because it is temporary. It could at any moment disappear. Okay, at any moment, if Anna gets struck by lightning, then all of a sudden the life estate that she sold is worthless, right? It's over, it's finished. Okay, and so what she's doing is asking the court to sell the fee simple, or to force the sale of the fee simple and split the money. Okay, and they don't want to do this at this moment. Although it seems like there's not a lot of animosity here between the grandkids and and Anna, they still don't want to sell the property in this at this particular time. So, so she goes to court, and the court has to decide whether or not they should allow her to sell this property. So, so I've got it down here as Jeannie, but I think it's Abby. Am I calling on the right person here?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So Abby, what basis do the grandkids have to stop her from selling this?
The grandkids basically argue that let me take it back. They have the argument that they have the future interest in the property, and the forced sale of it now will give them way less money than the property is worth because of the construction.
Right, because what's happening to the value of the property?
It is increasing.
Right. And so like if you owned this property and you could sell it now for $180,000, or you could wait 5 years and sell it for $400,000, which would you do?
You would wait.
You would wait, right? Like from an investment standpoint, and that's what they're arguing, is that from an investment standpoint, it's not good for the property to be sold now because we are going to lose out on a significant amount of potential profit here. And so, Abby, the court, if you could describe how the court goes about this, you know, determining whether or not they should be able to stop the sale in this instance. You know, what is the court thinking about? Like, what factors seem to matter?
Well, the lower court rules in favor of Anna on a theory of economic waste based on the economy of the area. They're saying that the land was unproductive, and therefore that leaving it in its present condition would result in economic waste. Therefore, they should move forward with a judicial sale. But the grandkids.
Let me pause you there. So from Anna's standpoint, right, you said, and I think correctly, that if you owned the property just outright as fee simple, then you would definitely not sell it right now. You would wait for it to appreciate as this highway construction continues. But what's Anna's problem? Like, what's the problem with waiting for her?
Her only source of income is renting the property for agricultural purposes. So she's only making $1,000 a year based on that, and that's her only income. So she can't really afford to live anymore.
So she needs to do what?
Needs to sell the property so she can continue to live.
Right. So if she's under economic distress, then she can't wait for the 5 years for the property to depreciate. She needs the money now. And so she's saying, like, we need to do this today because I'm running out of cash here and I can't get anything more out of this property and I'm stuck. And so she is essentially arguing that she's stuck with this property that can't get the income that is needed for her to survive. And Abby, if I could just bring it all the way back, what do you think that Whedon, the decedent here, would want to happen in this situation? Do you think he would want Anna to be struggling to make ends meet and put food on her table? Or do you think that he really wants her to be taken care of?
I think since the grandchildren were an afterthought and his children were excluded entirely, that he would just want Anna to be taken care of. So I think he would be for the sale of the property.
I think that's right. Unfortunately, what he has created is a situation in which the grandchildren do have a future interest, and instead of, and though he might have imagined, it sounded like he was encouraging Anna to someday have children of her own. That's not happening here. And so the strict interpretation of his will is such that the grandkids aren't really doing anything wrong. It's just creating a situation in which Anna is actually stuck on the property. Okay, and so we're going to talk in just for a few minutes, about what he should have done instead of what he did. Okay, he created a life estate and a contingent remainder, but maybe he should have done something differently. Okay, and so you use the word economic waste. When you hear that word, you know, what do you think of when you hear waste?
It kind of reminds me of the idea of like bettering the property or using the property. I think it's along the same line of utilizing property.
Okay, good. And so note that if you are a fee simple holder, you can do whatever you want with your property, right? So let's say your property would be really valuable if you put a, I don't know, a restaurant or a gas station on the property, but you don't like restaurants and gas stations, and you want the property to be used as, you know, something else or unused, right? As a fee simple holder, are you able to do whatever you want in that regard from a use standpoint?
Yes.
Yeah. So what if, let's say your property is trees, right? It's a forest. If you're a fee simple holder, can you cut down all the trees on your own property? Yeah, you can. What makes life estates in particular complicated is that if you cut down all the trees, you're not just affecting your interest. What other interest are you affecting?
You're affecting the future interest.
You're affecting the future interest. So when we have property that is saddled with future interests, in addition to whatever possessory interest that we have, in this instance, a life estate, we create this dynamic in which the life estate holder has access to the property and in theory can do whatever they want with the property. And the future interest holder, though, has an interest too, and they probably want the stuff to be in reasonably the same shape when it becomes theirs. And so what the law of waste is a doctrine that protects future interest holders from having the property, physical property, wasted or damaged or devalued or deteriorated while the present interest holder is on it. Okay, so normally when we're having a case about waste, what we're having is something like the grandchildren. Let's say Anna wants to burn the whole property, right, and just and turn it into a giant bonfire, and that's going to destroy the value of the crops or the trees or whatever it is that's on the property. What we would have in a waste situation is the future interest holders coming in and saying, no, stop. You can't do that. You're devaluing our interests in addition to whatever you're doing to your own interests, which you're free to do. Okay, you're free to do whatever you want to your own interests, but you're about to devalue our interests. Okay, and so that's normally what we have with waste. How is this, Abby, different from that normal waste situation?
Because it's not the future interest who is using that, it's the life estate who is using economic waste. Okay,
so it's partial. It could be that it's a flip of the perspective that we're taking, right? We're saying, well, the person who's wanting to protect the property is actually the present estate holder, and the future estate holders are trying to stop something from, stop something from happening. So that's good. That's one way in which it's a little bit different than typical waste. Lauren or Charles, how else is it different from a waste standpoint from from the sort of classic waste situation that I've described for you guys.
Yeah, Anna's in a situation that is not of her own making. She is not
Okay.
taking any action that is devaluing the property. It is simply the difference between what the property can bring for rental income versus what its commercial value is. That delta between the two, and that's
So
not
that
of her. You know, she's not causing that.
she's not doing anything, right? So there's nothing affirmative being done by Anna here that is being stopped. So that's another difference. What about the value of the property? When Anna's setting a bonfire and burning her entire the land, what is she doing to the value of the property?
She's devaluing it.
Devaluing it. And what's happening to the property here?
It's doing the opposite. It's appreciating.
It's appreciating instead of depreciating. And so what the court is being asked by the grandkids to do is to apply this waste doctrine to a situation that is quite unusual or quite unlike the typical waste doctrine situation. Okay? So the typical waste doctrine situation is where something affirmative is being done by the present estate holder, the life estate holder, that is devaluing the property. Here, what we have is a life estate holder that is not doing anything, and the property is increasing in value. And so it's almost like the exact opposite of the situation, of a typical waste situation. And so, Abby, if you could help walk us through, so you gave what happened at the court below. So then this court, what do they ultimately decide on the question of waste?
They ultimately decide in favor of the grandkids,
Mm-hmm.
and they look at the idea of deterioration and waste, and they say that that's not the exclusive determining factor in whether a judicial sale should occur, because you have to look at whether or not it's in the best interest of all the parties involved to sell the land, or whether it's not. In this case, it wasn't in the best interest of all the parties. It was only in the best interest of Anna.
Great. And so they say waste is not a doctrine that is limited to situations of deterioration or destruction of property, but actually is a broader concept that says what takes into account the interests of all interest holders, right? The best interests of all interest holders. Here, they say the balance is don't sell now. And then, Abby, what ultimately ends up happening with, so the court gives a win to the grandkids, so they have the ability to stop the sale. But ultimately, if in the sort of postscript, what happens in this case?
Don't they ask for part of the land to be sold to help meet Anna's needs?
Yeah. So and then eventually they relent and sell the whole thing, because it turns out Anna outlives several of the grandkids anyway, and so their interests, would have become possessory. Some of them never would have become possessory, right? Because it would have passed on because they died before Anna even died. So do you think this is the right outcome? You said earlier that you don't think this is what the decedent would have wanted. So, and when I say outcome, I'm talking about the court's decision, not so much what ultimately ended up happening, that they came to some sort of settlement and agreement and figured it out. They worked this out. This is a happy ending here. But
I think it makes sense, but I don't think it's in line with the intention of either party.
okay.
I think the grandkids, because they made an effort to sell the land even when they would get less money, they just never were offered a favorable price. I think that it's not in line with what either party wanted. I mean, I think the grandkids clearly wanted to make money, and in the end, that's what happened. But I think, in my heart, I think Anna should have won.
Okay, and that they should have just sold it. And even, you know, the reality is when they sold it, she wasn't going to get all the money. She was going to get whatever the value of the life estate portion of it was. And so you think that in your heart, but I think, you know, that's great that in your heart, but whose heart really ought we pay attention to?
I think
Or
we
whose
should-
intent really ought we pay attention to?
I think we should pay attention to Whedon's heart because you have to look at the intention of his will.
Right. And go ahead.
Provide for her.
Yeah, and so while we might have our own personal feelings about it, you know, and those are great, what really matters is that this may be contrary to Whedon's intent. Okay, Lauren, what do you think? Is this the right outcome on the law?
I think it's the right outcome. I think he should have just left Anna with the fee simple to avoid the confusion that it caused, since as we can tell, his interests were for Anna, and everybody else was just kind of afterthought.
Great. And so you say, unfortunately, whatever he wanted, he created a situation in which this is what he created, a life estate with a contingent remainder, and that if he had really wanted her to have a fee simple, then that was possible to do. He didn't do it, and therefore we have to interpret it how it's written. And how it's written is such that they have a contingent remainder and therefore have the ability to sort of step in here. Okay, so I want to, on that last point, other things that he could have done. I'm going to pull this up. So in this case, just I want y'all to hear me say it. The notes after notes 3 and note 4 are are particularly important. Okay, note 3 and note 4 are particularly important. And I want to talk about each of those for a second. So note 3 is about what he could have done aside from creating what he did, right? This is what he created, these contingent remainders, but what he could have done. And I really just want y'all to have a sense of this concept more than anything else, because what he created was very firm, right? It goes to Anna. If she has kids, it goes to her kids. If she doesn't have kids, when she dies, it goes to his grandkids, okay? It was very firm, and it was what it was. And as Lauren kind of said, you know, if he had wanted to do something different, he could have, but this is what he created. So the concept that I want to introduce here is that it's possible to create greater flexibility by using trusts which split sticks in a way different than what we've seen. So we've seen the difference between title and possession. We've seen the difference between possessory estates and future interests, so life estates and remainders, for example. What we haven't really encountered thus far, but what's going to be really important going forward, especially if you end up in this field in practice, is a different kind of split, a split between what's known as legal interests and equitable interests, okay? And the reason I say it's important if you end up in this field going forward is because the reason that you learn any of this in the first year of law school is because if you are going to be a trusts and estates or lawyer who drafts wills or determines what happens with stuff, then you need to know all of the different ways in which that can be done. The vast majority of property is held in fee simple, okay? A lot of property has leases attached to it, but the vast majority of property is held in fee simple. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time. We've already done so with life estates, and we're going to spend some time in just a few minutes talking about these defeasible fees. but most everything is fee simple. However, a huge amount of property is held in fee simple in trust, which means there's a trustee who is overseeing the property for the benefit of somebody else. And so what you do when you split the legal and the equitable sticks is you say the legal title is held by one person, okay? So in this example, to A in trust for the benefit of X for life, then to Z, the trust shall be blah, 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 okay? A has a legal fee simple in that example. That means A can sell it, A can do whatever they want with this property. However, they are bound by the terms of this trust to do all of those things for the benefit of X for life and then to Z. And so if you just look at this portion, okay, that should look very familiar to us, okay? That looks like a life estate and a remainder. And in fact, it is a life estate and a remainder, but it's a life estate and a remainder in trust, okay? Not, the X doesn't actually own this property. If you go down to the registry of deeds, it'll look like A is the owner of this property, okay? Because it's to A. That's a fee simple. So A is bound by what's called a fiduciary obligation to manage the property for the benefit of X and Z in this example, for the trust beneficiaries. The reason I mention it is because here, rather than somebody going to court to figure out what the best interests are, here we have a situation in which the trustee has essentially full discretion to manage the property however they see fit. So if they determine that the best thing to do is to sell, then they sell. If they determine that the best thing to do is to hold off, then they hold off. If they determine that the best thing to do is, in this case, it might have been to take out a loan against the value of the property to give Anna the income, right? Some money to live on. If they determine that that's the best way to take care of Anna while maintaining the interests of the grandchildren, then they can do that. However, if it's a legal life estate, Anna can't take out a loan, right? She's not going to get a very good loan, a mortgage on this property. So all I really want y'all to know at this point is that trusts provide enormous flexibility. They keep property from having these kinds of burdens on them that would allow them not to be used for a mortgage, for example, or collateral for a loan of some sort. And the way they do it is by splitting the legal and the equitable sticks, okay? So we're not gonna talk a lot about trusts, except I want you to be constantly aware of their existence as a possible alternative to doing some of the things that we're gonna actually encounter in the course, because in practice, you will use trusts. You will not be creating legal life estates or legal fee simple determinables, the other things that we're gonna talk about. Almost all of it is gonna be filtered into a trust situation. So I want you to be aware of it. I want you to sort of recognize the concept, and sort of that's about it. So I'm gonna pause here. Are there questions on trusts? Knowing that, you know, we're not gonna get nitty gritty into trusts. I just want a general understanding of the concept and the potential benefits of them. Okay. So then let me talk about note 4. So note 4 is giving us some more about waste. So beyond what we can pull out of the case itself. And it's just an important thing to keep in mind, because waste is the doctrine that keeps possessory estate holders accountable to future interest holders. Otherwise, possessory estate holders and possessory estate holders the life estate holder has every incentive to use the property. And the future interest holder generally has no ability to stop that. Waste is the thing that gives the future interest holder the ability to stop it. Okay. And so here is your definition. It prohibits a holder of a possessory interest from using the property in a manner, and this is the key line, that unreasonably interferes with the expectations of future interest holders. Okay. So that's the sort of money line from our definition of waste. And so it's hard to come up with bright line rules in terms of what is and isn't waste. But these are the factors that you're going to look at to determine whether or not a particular situation is a situation in which waste is occurring such that the future interest holder can stop it. Okay, because that's essentially what happens. So this waste is almost always a situation in which the future interest holder is trying to stop the possessory interest holder from doing something. Okay, and so the things that you keep in mind are the nature of the interests. That means, like, are we dealing with life estates? Are we dealing with defeasible fees? What are we dealing with? How long those interests are. So if it's a life estate of a 15-year-old versus a life estate of a 85-year-old, right? Even though obviously anyone could go at any moment, the duration is such that the life estate of an 85-year-old is likely to last far shorter period of time than a life estate held by a 15-year-old. Okay, and so the longer the possessory interest holders' interest is likely to last, the more discretion they have to do what they want on their property without interference from the future interest holder. And then this last one could have been an issue in this particular case. How certain are we that the future interest holder is going to take? So, Lauren, you told us that if Anna had kids, what happened to the grandkids' interests in this case?
They didn't have any interest.
They didn't have any, right? So there was a possibility that the grandkids would end up with no interest in this property. And so normally what you would see is courts saying, well, we don't know if this interest is even going to become possessory, the grandkids, and therefore we don't give them as much say in what happens or doesn't happen on the property. Here, they didn't really take that into account because it seemed like it had been decided that Anna was not going to have kids. Just as a sort of quirky side note, if Anna had adopted a child, like while this case was pending, then all of a sudden the grandkids are completely out, right? They don't have any interest any longer. So that's the first place we look, the nature of the interest. The second place we looked is the conduct in question. It's right there on the list. Does it substantially reduce the value of the property? As we know from this case, it doesn't always have to be a reduction in the value of the property, but it's typical, right? That's more typical what we have. I could have put on here, does it substantially and permanently, right? Is it something that can be undone? So if it's trees that we're talking about being cut down, then what we see is a situation in which we say, well, are those trees going to grow back? If it's crops, is it permanent, a permanent change to the property that is going to substantially reduce its value? And then another factor that we keep in mind is what's happening on the property at the time that the interests were created. So for example, if it's a farm and the crops were being harvested each year, right? Then the future interest holder can't say, no, don't harvest the crops, right? That's waste. There's a thought with waste that whatever is happening on the property at the time that the interests are created, so when Whedon died, for example, in this case, whatever's happening then, the life estate holder can continue doing that thing. So here, that wasn't really an issue, but let's say it was cutting trees down, or maybe more likely taking oil out of the ground, right? So if I had a property that had oil on it and I gave it to my kids as a life estate and then to their kids, then and they continue taking the oil, they would have a good argument. My kids would have a good argument to say we can continue doing that because it was already being done at the time that the interests were created. Is that making sense? Hopefully. And so, and then the last factor is the remedy sought. Like, are they actually trying to stop behavior or are they seeking damages? Typically, if they're just seeking damages, then the court is a lot more flexible because damages don't really restrict the possessory estate holder from doing anything. They just make them pay for it if in fact it does reduce the value of the property for the future interest holders. Okay, so that's a little bit of more detail on waste and on trust that we get from those notes after the case. Are there questions on Baker versus Whedon, waste, trusts, other stuff? David, I saw your hand up a while ago. I fear that we've way past whatever it was.
Yeah, it was a more simple, not fee simple question, but life estate question when you were bringing up what was it? That it would end with Anna's life. And my question was, if it kept selling down the chain, would it still be connected to that original life estate's life? Okay.
Yes. It always has the nature of the stick when the stick was created. And it was created attached to Anna's life. And so it will always be attached to Anna's life. Yeah, JC.
Should we become pretty familiar with the differences between affirmative waste, permissive waste, and ameliorative waste, or just basically what you've provided us on the factors and the primary definition?
I think the definition and the factors are the most important. What he's referring to is also there in that note about the different types of waste. I don't think the rules really operate that differently depending on what you're whether it's affirmative waste, like you're actually cutting something down, or permissive waste, like you're letting it deteriorate. I don't think that the rules are fundamentally different for those. And so, you know, it might be helpful for you to recognize different ways in which waste can happen. But I don't need you to be able to say, oh, this is a case of affirmative waste or something like that. The only thing I would say is if it's ameliorative waste, that's waste that's actually increasing the value of the property. Courts don't have a lot of patience for those kinds of claims from future interest holders. Anybody else? We good?
This is David again. Could you just repeat the waste definition? I got the nature of interest, conduct in question, and remedy sought, but I think I'm missing the basic definition you said.
It is the doctrine that prohibits the holder of a possessory interest from using the property in a manner that unreasonably interferes with the expectations of holders of future interests. Hold on. There. It's in the chat. Jack?
Yes, sir. I was just curious if Mr. Whedon had said something, so that the second part talking about the girls that he cut out of his will, if he had said something like, I give all of my property to Anna, to Anna and my heirs, would that have made a fee simple for Anna? And then since it's a fee simple that his heirs had no interest, but when she died, then it would go to those grandkids? Is that possible to do?
To Anna, no. What you've described does not do that at all. What it does is to Anna and my heirs. That's what you
Yes,
said?
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you mean like to Anna for life, then to my heirs? Because to
I
Anna
guess-
and because the reason I'm saying is because to Anna and my heirs creates a fee simple that is split between Anna and his heirs. And so it would just create like a fee simple that is held divided among Anna and the heirs, whoever that is.
Okay, so you can't, it wouldn't like kind of satisfy what we were upset about with this, but because it was originally, which you said we don't have to say anymore, to X and his or her heirs, you can slip that my in to satisfy what we were kind of upset about here.
I don't think so. I don't think that. I think what he could have done is obviously give her a fee simple. That would have been one thing. But it seems like he does want, if she doesn't have kids, for it to go to his grandkids and not his daughters, right? So what he's doing is creating a situation in which the remainder is not going to be held. It's not a reversion that goes to his estate, which would go to his children, but rather it skips that generation and goes straight to the grandkids. That's what he seems to want to happen. What he should have done, this is why trust is important, is he should have put it in trust and allowed Anna to be she could even have been the trustee. And then she would have had the ability to manage the property for her benefit, including selling it. She just would have had to have kept, whatever the money was for that sale. She would have had to hold it in an account and at least keep a portion of it set aside for the grandkids that they would take after she died. That's what he should have done.
Okay.
But what you described would not have accomplished that. It would have in fact made it a lot more. It would have made it simple in that it was a fee simple, but it would have made it more complicated because it would have been a fee simple split among a lot of different people.
Even with that last clause where he talks about, hey, I want to cut these two daughters out specifically.
Still his heirs. Yeah, they're still his heirs. Just saying I want to cut them out doesn't make them not his heirs.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? So you can see what we're trying to do. What we're saying could have been helpful here would be more flexibility. Okay, and so one bit of trust is an example of how you might accomplish greater flexibility. But another way in which you might accomplish greater flexibility is through creating a possessory estate that is connected not to a life, but to some other condition, right? To some other condition. That is what a defeasible fee does, okay? It creates a situation in which instead of having the possessory interest stuck to life, the possessory interest is instead stuck to some event. And the event would be called the moment of defeasance. And the words that are used to describe it are called the language of defeasance. Okay, and defeasance is that. And so let's talk about, there's three types. And really all three are very, very similar to one another in that what they do is create possessory estates. So they're this column that last until some other event happens, right? Not until the end of an identified life, but it's until this moment of defeasance occurs, okay? And so the first one that we're going to talk about is this fee simple determinable. And just to walk through the chart quickly, you create it with language that is, and so this can be really irritating for students, words of duration, okay? So the difference between a fee simple determinable and a fee simple subject to condition subsequent, the next one, is in the creation, right? The words that are used. When the words that are used are so long as, while, during, they are considered words of duration, and that is the language that creates a fee simple determinable. Okay. And so I've put X, right? X is not a person. X is an event. Okay. So long as X, so long as it's used for school purposes, so long as it's, so long as the Grizzlies stay in Memphis, that's an example that I use. So long as whatever. Okay. How long does it last? It lasts until X happens, until that moment of defeasance. And at that moment of defeasance, just like at the end of an identified life for a life estate, it's over. Okay. It's over. And so since it has a future interest, I mean, since it has an end, it has a future interest. Okay. And here, what we call the future interest is a possibility of reverter. Now, I know that when I'm saying a possibility of reverter, you're thinking that possibility is like descriptive. It's possible that there's a reverter. I want you to just say it out loud. You don't have to unmute yourselves. The future interest is possibility of reverter. Okay, it is not a reverter. It is a possibility of reverter. That is the proper name, right? So it's capitals, possibility of reverter. So if you are identifying an interest and you see a fee simple determinable, then don't call the future interest a reverter. Call it a possibility of reverter. That's what it's called, okay? And fee simple determinables do not have any interests held by other third parties. So it's kind of like these situations like this one, to A for life, where there's no future interest accounted for, and so it comes back to the grantor. So let's see this in action. Okay, so 2A, so long as the Grizzlies remain in Memphis. So when you see something like this, you're seeing so long as, that is the first thing that you see, and you think to yourself, that is a fee simple determinable, or you should first think to yourself, that's a defeasible fee. And it looks like it's going to be a fee simple determinable because of this particular language. We're going to talk about other situations in which that might not be the case on Wednesday. Okay, so who has what interests? A has, excuse me, A has a fee simple determinable, and O, the grantor, has a possibility of reverter, not a reverter, a possibility of reverter. Okay. So then we ask the next question, what happens if the Grizzlies leave Memphis? So did anybody want to take a stab? If X happens, what happens to the fee simple determinable?
A loses the fee simple determinable.
A loses the fee simple determinable. And so then what interests, Alex, does anybody have? What do you think? You're right. A loses the fee simple determinable. So who's the future interest holder?
O.
O. And so what happens to the interests here?
It reverts back to O.
And so O has
reverted interest. The fee simple. Yeah.
right. So you're describing what happens, and I'm just giving you what sticks O has. So you might say at the beginning that O had a possibility of reverter in fee simple. Okay, that means we know that when it becomes possessory, when it switches from this side over to this side, what form it is going to take. It is going to take the form of a fee simple. Okay, it was a possibility of reverter, and it became a fee simple. So this is fee simple determinables. And let's stop here. So we'll stop at the end of fee simple determinables, and we'll pick back up with this and a bunch of examples on Wednesday. Okay? Sound like a plan? Okay. I will see you guys then. Have a good rest of your Monday.
Hey, Professor, real quick before I go, I just wanted to ask you what your take was on the property E&E and whether you recommended that or not.
I haven't looked at it, right? So there's always a danger with this stuff that they're going to be using terminology that is different than what I would use. I suspect that it's helpful, right? Like I know that the sprinkling property, I don't know what you call it, but
I think it's by the same publisher, but I know like for torts, like the material doesn't really line up, but for Civ Pro, like it lines up really well. So I didn't know what you thought, because I know it has a lot of like hypotheticals that we usually run through. So I
right.
didn't know
So there are like the tricky thing with conveyances, really. Like I think it's perfectly fine for adverse possession and gifts and law of fine and loss mislaid and all that stuff. I think it's perfectly good for all of those things. What I think you might run into problems with is with conveyances, there's all these little quirks, some of which I teach and some of which I skip over. And the ones that I skip over, if they're covered in the E&E, then sometimes it's not so much that it's going to change the answers, but it's going to change the way that they describe the explanation, the second E. And here's my thought on it. As long as you feel like you've got what we're covering, and you can differentiate and say, well, we didn't touch fee tails because fee tails don't really exist anymore. And we didn't touch this particular principle, this sort of sub rule. As long as you can make that distinction for yourself and say, okay, I get generally what this is about. And though the E&E explanation is a little bit different, I understand the core of what I need to understand, then I think it's useful to have those problems to work through, right? Having problems to work through, I think, is really helpful. But I just would caution that sometimes the explanations will be a little bit, just a little different than what you'll need to know for this class.
So basically what you're saying is use our class notes as a primary, and then if like the E&E, just to get like clarification over something that if I didn't understand it in class, read the E&E, and then obviously if I'm still confused, like come to you.
Right. And use our practices, right? So you'll have all the old exams. I'm about to post them probably today, where you can look through and say, okay, here are problems. You're not going to get the explanations, right? But if you do the problems, then I will work through, I'll grade them essentially and say, yeah, you got this one right. You're missing this concept, whatever. So that's another place that you can.
And then I was just going to ask, when do you think our second quiz is going to be? Is it coming up here pretty soon?
It should be.
Okay.
It should be, but I'll give you all notice. I'm starting to regret making those quizzes a part of the semester.
Yeah,
so
I didn't do too hot on the first one, so I'm really itching to get the second one.
Okay. Well, I'll keep that in mind.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Professor. Thank you for your time.
Okay.